This is not a block-by-block tutorial, but instead, I'll be teaching you Minecraft's basic mechanics as simply and as easy to understand as possible. Today, we'll be going over chunk loading. So, you've just come home from a long mining trip, and this is what greets you back home. Why? Well, because your base was unloaded when you went off mining. Let me explain. Minecraft's world is massive, and for it to run smoothly, it needs to save up as much processing power as possible. Minecraft does this by loading only necessary areas around the player. A lot of open world games with big maps do this, but unlike other games, Minecraft doesn't keep track of how long the player has left the area for. Therefore, it doesn't add the missing time to the unloaded areas when the player returns. These calculated areas around the players are called chunks, and they are a 16 by 16 area from world height all the way down to bedrock. That means the game is loading everything around the player from Y384 down to Y-64. So you don't have to worry about loading or unloading vertically. The game only loads and unloads horizontally. You can have a farm in the sky, be in bedrock level, and that farm will still run. You can see the chunk borders by holding F3 and G. And for a more detailed look, you can see the chunk's coordinates here, and your coordinates relative to the chunk here. The amount of loaded chunks around the player is set by the render distance setting, but as you can see, there's also a simulation distance setting too. What's the difference? Render distance loads the environment, while simulation distance processes the world. What does that mean? Anything that requires a tick update like crop growth, mob spawning, fire tick, redstone signals, thunder strikes, item despawning, leaves despawning, etc. are only processed within the simulated distance, while the render distance is just what you see. So, even though you can see your farm from 12 chunks away, but your simulation distance is only 2 chunks, your farm will not grow. And vice versa. If you have a simulation distance of 12 chunks, but only an 8 chunk render distance, you may not be able to see your farm, but it will still grow. And just like what I said before, both of these happen from bedrock to height limit. For multiplayer worlds, the simulated and render distance setting is set in the server properties and cannot be changed by the player's client. So, increasing your render distance past the server settings won't affect what the server loads. The number in your setting determines the distance of loaded chunks from the player, not including the chunk the player is on. For example, if you have a 5 render distance, you will load 5 chunks all around the chunk your player is at. Doesn't matter if you're here or here, as long as you're in the same chunk, the loaded area will still be the same. It will only change when the player moves to another chunk. Now, there's something called a lazy chunk. A lazy chunk is a 1 chunk border around your simulated distance that only processes redstone ticks and block updates. Random game ticks, entity movement, and mob AI is not processed. So, mobs won't move unless a redstone device moves them. Crop stops growing unless you bone mill them with dispensers. Minecarts stop moving. Villager traits stop refreshing. Trees stop despawning. Fires stop spreading, and so on. This is how your hopper minecarts can get stuck when you leave an area. Even though mob AI isn't processed, the game still recognizes the entities as existing, meaning mob still counts towards the mob count. Otherwise, you'd always come home to an empty cow pen. At this point, some of you might be wondering, is there a way to keep my farms running even when I'm away? Yes, there is. You will need a chunk loader. There are many chunk loaders, but by far the most popular one is using nether portals and recently an ender pearl stasis chamber. The portal chunk loaders will load a 3x3 chunk area. The chunk the portal is at will be the center of the 3x3 chunk, and the chunks surrounding the 3x3 area will become lazy chunks. And for those wondering what happens when a portal is built between chunks, the center of the 3x3 chunk will be towards the positive coordinate direction. So if you're building your portal between these 2 chunks, the chunks that is in the positive coordinate direction will become the center. For the Pearl Stasis chunk loader, it only loads 1 chunk, and the surrounding chunks also becomes lazy chunks. How do these chunk loaders work? For the portal, whenever an entity enters a portal, the dimension needs to be loaded first before the entity can be transported. So the portal chunk loaders create a loop where an entity crosses dimensions over and over again. For the Ender Pearl Stasis Chamber, an Ender Pearl loads chunks to figure out where to teleport the player when a pearl lands. If the pearl never lands, the game will keep on checking and loading the chunk where the pearl is at. These chunk loaders will not work if you exit your single player world, but it can work in multiplayer worlds as long as the server is running. However, building too many of these will create lag and may harm your server. So be careful when you're building these. There is a reason why the game unloads chunks. There is another way to always load your farms, and that is to build it in the spawn chunks. Unfortunately, this feature was removed in version 1.21.9. For those of you still playing in 1.21.8 or below, the spawn chunks are basically the world spawn that is always loaded no matter what. The size of the spawn chunk will vary depending on which version you're playing on. For those of you playing in 1.20.5 or above, the spawn chunks will be a 3x3 chunk area, but you can change the radius using the command /game rule spawn chunk radius. And if you're playing on 1.20.4 or below, the spawn chunks is a 19x19 chunk area. You can find the spawn chunks using a compass. It will point to the middle of a block, and the chunk the block is in will be the center chunk of your spawn chunks. I hope this was easy enough for you to understand and hope that you learned something new. As always, if you want to learn more, all the wiki links used are down in the description. If there's anything I missed or if there's any questions, comment down below in the comments. Peace.